Okay, so a few years ago, I lived in an apartment complex in San Antonio, Texas. I lived there for about 4 years with a couple of my best friends. So over the years, I would run in a neighborhood that was close to our apartment complex. I actually had a couple of weird things happen to me throughout the years running through there, as well as at our complex. But this event was the most terrifying moment of my life and caused me to stop running in that neighborhood altogether, until life finally found my friends and I moving to different cities. So over the years of running in that neighborhood, I became familiar with this one house that gave serious trap house vibes. It was very out of place for the neighborhood, as there was an elementary school just up the street, and the area is not a high-crime area. It was a corner house that was at the first stop sign of my running path, and housed a group of about 6 huge men, and they always had people coming and going. It sounded like they threw a never-ending party, and their property smelled strongly of weed. As a woman and an avid watcher of crime documentaries, I'm constantly paranoid and observant of my surroundings, which is why I'd come to know that house so well. Throughout the years, I'd always managed to see them, but they never saw me. But the last year we lived there, that changed. Just so you all know, it was not dark at all during this event. The sun was out and shining brightly, and it was about 5:30 p.m. or so. So I'm at the start of my path, and I'm coming up to that first stop sign and the house. I look for them and their vehicle and any potential traffic, and I see that they aren't home. I continue on my run, which takes me further up past that house into another neighborhood, where I would run around in a cul-de-sac a few times before running back down that path. I'd say about an hour and a half passed by, and then I decide to head home before the sun starts to set and it gets dark. As I'm running home and coming up to that house and the stop sign, I'm listening to music and running, and I see that I'll need to stop at that stop sign because of traffic. So I'm coming up to the stop sign, which puts the house to the right of me and the stop sign for the 4-way intersection to the left of me. I credit what happened next to trusting my instincts, remaining observant, and being in band and softball. I was honestly really tired from my run, so I was kind of looking down at the ground rather than ahead, but I was utilizing my peripheral vision. So I take off to run across the street to the sidewalk that will take me to a fence on the side of my apartment complex, and I see that the vehicle that had been stopped at the stop sign perpendicular to me is the vehicle I know to belong to the house that was just on the right of me. Out of the corner of my eye, I see them turn like if they're going down their street, when I think, that turn seemed too wide, like a U-turn, which is weird since their house is right there. I take all of 2 tired steps before I get this sinking gut feeling. I have never in my life felt this feeling before, but immediately I felt danger at my back, and everything in my body and mind told me to run for my life. So I did. With that feeling of fear in my stomach and danger at my back, I sprinted down the sidewalk and slid under the fence like I was sliding to home plate. I immediately popped up and turned around to look outside the fence where I'd just been, and I saw them. The group of men that I'd only ever seen in passing were sitting in their car on the street outside of my apartment complex fence with their windows down, and all 6 of them staring at me. We stared at each other for what seemed like a long time before I watched them drive away. And once they were out of sight, I ran like hell to my apartment and locked myself in there, scared to show them exactly where my apartment was, as I was worried they were circling the complex looking for me. I told my friends what happened and spent the rest of the night full of adrenaline, pacing and reflecting on what had happened. Those men purposely chose not to go home, but pull a U-turn to follow behind me as I ran. Recounting the story over the years, I've had people tell me it was so they could view my ass as I ran, but when I remember that feeling in my body, that was almost a voice in my head, yelling at me to run like my life depended on it, and think of their blank faces and dark eyes staring at me from inside that vehicle. I seriously question what their true intentions were that day. I used to live in an old Victorian house in Maryland, and at the time of this story, I was 10 years old. The house had been turned into a duplex that split the 2 floors, and they were basically just rented as apartments. I lived in the upstairs one. There was a university nearby, so we had a lot of college students, and we also had a lot of drug issues in the area. People were always getting their houses searched or getting into fights over it, and I don't remember much crime happening that was unrelated to drugs. The owner of the house had told my family that the people who had rented the upstairs previously had given him a lot of trouble and he had kicked them out. My family had just moved there for my dad's new job, and we didn't have a place to live yet, so we were thankful that their contract ended early so we could take their place. If there was anything else the owner told my parents, it was not shared with me. I was homeschooled online and an only child, so my parents would leave for the day to go to work, while I stayed in the apartment and did my schoolwork alone. Maybe about a week after we moved in, there was this loud banging on the door. I ran down the inside stairs to open it, and there was this tall, thick man, dressed in all black, with a black mask over his whole face, with holes in it for his eyes and mouth. As immensely stupid as this sounds, no alarm bells went off to me. This place was cold year-round, and I stupidly just assumed his gear happened to be black. Behind him, I remember seeing a car parked next to the building that was still running. He just stood there silently for a couple of seconds, and I felt awkward. So I said, "Hi, can I help you with something?" He continued to just stand there for what felt to me like forever, before saying something like, "I'm here for the mail." I'm smiling and said something like, "Oh, sure, you must have just moved out. My dad already brought the mail in this morning. Let me go see if there's anything there." So I turned around, left the door wide open, and ran inside to find the mail pile. I looked through it, but I didn't see anything that didn't have my family's name on it. So I went back to the door. When I went back to tell him the bad news, he was gone, and so was the car. When they came home that evening, I told my parents that the previous renters had stopped by and asked for their mail. My dad had a fit and said I shouldn't have opened the door while I was home alone, and that apparently our mail comes from the owner, since he separates it before bringing it to each renter's box, since we had the same address, so we wouldn't have gotten any mail that didn't belong to us anyway, and that the previous renters would already know that. He was furious with me for being a moron, and that was before he thought to ask what they looked like. I described the all-black suit and mask. I know enough now to know that I handled the situation entirely wrong, and I'm beyond stupid, and I'm not looking to get berated for it. I would actually like to hear why you think, if this suspicious guy had malicious intentions, why didn't he do anything? I was home alone. It was morning, so my parents wouldn't have come back until the evening anyway. I don't even think the other renter was home. I clearly didn't suspect anything from him and left the door wide open while I turned my back to him and ran inside the house. I'm immensely thankful that nothing happened to me. I don't ever want to appear as ungrateful that this didn't take an awful turn. I just don't understand what protected me, if that is actually the case. I had a dive buddy go out of air on me on a wreck in the St. Lawrence. Thankfully, this was a no-deco dive in under 100 foot of water, and we weren't actually inside the wreck. But the part that made it particularly challenging was that the wreck was right in the middle of the shipping lane, with a really high current, so we couldn't just make an easy ascent to the surface. We had to navigate along a series of lines that had been laid out to give divers something to hang on to so they could pull themselves against the current on the path to the wreck, and to stabilize themselves during the swim back to the anchor line. We were making our exit, and everything was going fine. He was on my 7-foot hose out in front, and I had a hand on his knee, so we were keeping in good contact. Then, for one moment, I let go of his knee to deal with some gear. In that split second, he came off the line and got caught in the current, ripping my regulator out of his mouth in the process. I saw him manage to grab hold of another of the lines downstream, and he was hanging on for dear life, completely inverted, in a shipping lane, with no regulator in his mouth and no gas in his tank, flapping in the current like a flag in the wind. I bolted towards him as quickly as I could while still maintaining my own safety, and gathered up the 7 foot of abandoned hose and regulator along the way. I caught up to him and managed to get the regulator back into his mouth, but since he was inverted, it went upside down and as a result, didn't breathe like it should. He fixed that himself, but slipped off the line he was holding onto in the process. I managed to get a hold of him, but not without having to let go of the line myself. So I ended up hooking both of my feet around the line to keep us both in place. Somehow I managed to pull us both back down to where we could grab hold of the line. It was at this point that another diver in our group saw what was going on and assisted. And from there, we were able to get back to the boat without any further incident. Let me preface the story with a bit of background information. I'm a college student majoring in engineering. I'm currently away from school on a co-op rotation with a major company. My company is headquartered in a larger city, and I'm working at a smaller site just north of HQ. I live in a small township in the suburbs, a gated apartment complex in a very nice area. I regularly go on jogs with my music on full blast and my dog at my side. We walk around at night. It's by all accounts a very safe place to live, and I felt very safe here. Until today. I woke up and got ready for work like normal. When I got in my car, not only was it basically frozen over, but I noticed I was low on gas. I decided not to risk it and fill up before work. Once my front and back windows defrosted just enough for me to see, I drove a block down the road to my usual fill-up spot. It has lots of pumps and usually isn't packed, and it's really close to my apartment. They also usually have lower prices than other gas stations in the area. I pull into the parking lot and there isn't another car anywhere, save for a semi-truck parked by the doors and employee cars around the side. All the pumps are open. I pull up to the farthest right pump and hop out. As I'm swiping my card and doing all that fun stuff, another car pulls up. I didn't get a great look at it, honestly, but it wasn't shiny or new. I barely paid any attention until the car stopped at the pump on the other side of my own. You know how pumps are double-sided? Of all the open pumps, this driver chose the one connected to the one I was currently using. Not exactly perfect pandemic manners. Still, I didn't think that much of it, at least not initially. I could hear the other drivers swiping their card and entering their PIN number. I was freezing cold and just trying to hurry. I turned around and put the nozzle in the car, and I stood there for a minute. Foolishly, I decided to keep my back turned. I didn't want to have contact with that person, so I tried to pretend nobody was there. Once I filled up, I removed the nozzle and turned around, still keeping to myself and not lifting my eyes. I finished the transaction and got my receipt. While it was printing, I looked up casually. I almost fell flat on the pavement when I saw a man peering around the corner of the pump, staring at me. You know how people sometimes describe creepy people as having an inhumane quality? I never really understood that until today. The way this man looked at me sent a shiver down my spine. His eyes were cold and unyielding. He was not blinking or moving, but his gaze was growing even more intense. There was something animalistic in the way he stared at me. I felt like a deer being watched by a mountain lion. The hairs on the back of my neck stood. My instincts screamed at me to run. This all took place in the span of just a couple of seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. I quickly opened my car door. When I did, he moved his head, tilting it to the side to peer into my car. I didn't consider it at the time, but he might have been looking to see if I was alone. I intentionally blocked the view of the inside of my car with my body and closed the door quickly. I locked it immediately. I mentioned earlier that my car was nearly frozen over. By now, the front and back windows were entirely clear. The side windows, however, were almost still all icy. There was a single strip of clarity in the driver's side window, a result of me rolling the window down a few moments prior in an attempt to clear it off. As I hastily buckled my seatbelt, I ventured a glance to my left. The man was still there, still staring, but he'd inched closer. I could see more of his body than before. He was tall, with dark hair and a well-built frame. He was certainly larger than me. He seemed a few years older than me. Had it not been for those eyes, I might have said he was attractive. But those eyes, they were haunting. I decided to do the logical thing and get myself out of there as fast as possible. I didn't want to chance him being able to follow me. Though my work has great security, I didn't want him knowing where I worked. I don't know if this man was just a creep or something much darker, but I don't want to find out, ever. In my early 20s, I landed a receptionist job in a sales office at a manufactured housing community. It was my first office job after working in daycare and the food and drink industry. I was so excited. I greeted potential buyers, set up appointments, and staged the spec homes with our stock of furniture and decorations. I worked with one other person in the office, who was the salesman. When he was out of the office, I took potential buyers through our spec homes and gathered their information for the follow-up. I was working alone one day when a customer came into the office looking to potentially purchase his first home. I gathered some information from the young man and asked if he would like to look at some spec homes. As we walked down the sidewalk toward the row of spec homes, we chatted about the various floor plans and finishes available. I knew the product information and had no trouble confidently answering his questions. He was friendly and reminded me of a classmate from high school that had played offense on the football team. I decided to show him the two models that best fit his price range and desired floor plan. Since I shared most of the technical information during the first home tour, I gave him some space to freely look around the second home. He walked through the main living area and stopped in the doorway to one of the back bedrooms. He called out, "Hey, what is this back here?" and pointed to the corner of the room that I couldn't see from where I was standing. I knew these floor plans by heart, so I politely answered that it was a closet. He chuckled and asked again, "No, really, come here. What is this back here?" I could tell by his tone that he was pressuring me to come see for myself. He motioned for me to come closer and take a look. His tone was friendly, but his request didn't make sense. So I paused, and in that split second, something shifted. Maybe it was the energy in the air, the hairs on my neck standing straight up, or the way his eyes changed before me. I suddenly sensed the power dynamic had shifted. I did not feel safe. With all the lightheartedness I could muster, I repeated, "Oh, it's a closet. Excuse me for a moment. I need to check on something outside." I quickly made my exit back to the sidewalk outside of the house. I had no concrete reason for why I felt the overwhelming need to leave the house immediately. I didn't understand why my body sensed danger. I just knew I needed to act quickly. Over the next few days, the young man came back to the office to meet with the salesman. He filled out all the various paperwork needed to purchase a home and live within the community. He dropped by several more times unannounced to check on his application status. If I wasn't there, he would ask the salesman when I worked next. My coworker thought I had a not-so-secret admirer. I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling something wasn't right, so on the nights I worked alone, I locked the office door. A few days later, corporate sent back their analysis of the young man's application and completed background check. He had been denied. The background check revealed multiple sexual assault convictions, and there it was, crystal clear, undeniable, 20/20 hindsight. The salesman called the customer right away to let him know his application had been denied and that we could not do anything further for him. A few days, the young man decided to come back to the office one more time. When my coworker saw the young man's vehicle turn into our parking lot, he told me to go to the back room of the office where I would be out of sight. And just like the times before, the young man entered the office asking if I was working. This time he was met by a very angry 6-foot salesman that had nothing to lose. Needless to say, the young man never came by again, and I wasn't scheduled to work alone nearly as often. My husband and I like to go for walks after dinner. The neighborhood we live in is generally safe, even when walking around after dark, so we've never been guarded or felt afraid. One night during our walk, at around 8:30 p.m., a woman coming towards us began arguing with the man she was walking with. It was a pretty heated argument, but something about it felt like they were putting on a show for us. The street we do our nightly walks on has a slight incline, so we could see them coming downhill towards us. I actually noticed her from a little over a block away because her outfit looked familiar to me. A few months before this happened, a woman wearing a pink fake fur jacket with one of her shoulders exposed and a tank top kept trying to jokingly take my husband's pizza box away from him when we were waiting to cross the street, saying, "Oh my God, thank you, I'm starving." So when I saw this woman up the street coming towards us, wearing a similar style of jacket, also with one of her shoulders exposed, the first thing I thought was, I wonder if it's the same one that tried to take our pizza. As soon as they reached us, they went from completely quiet to screaming at each other. It was like they hit their marks on stage and someone yelled, "Action," and they began their rehearsed fight. They were so loud, I could see people on the other side of the street looking over at them. So I thought, if they'd been arguing like this all along, we definitely would have heard them long before we saw them. The two of them also switched the direction they were walking in. Originally, they were walking towards us, but as soon as they reached us and began arguing, they turned around and walked alongside us. They also boxed us in. The woman walking slightly in front of us to the left of my husband, and the guy yelling at her from behind me to my right. I could tell my husband was freaked out too, because he had a vice grip on my hand. "Get away from me, Josh," the woman screamed. "We broke up. God, leave me alone," she continued. "Why are you like this, always starting shit in public?" the man yelled. They kept pace with us. I tried walking faster to get away from them, but they sped up too. When we reached the intersection, even though we had the light, I pulled on my husband to stop for a bit, just to see what would happen. They both did as well. They clearly weren't anticipating the stop, because they actually continued walking a bit more, and then suddenly stopped when they realized we were standing still. The funny thing is, as soon as we stopped, I saw a brief look of confusion flash over her face, and they stood at the corner for a few seconds, staring at each other, completely quiet, like they weren't sure what was going on. And then, like they heard someone yell "action," resumed yelling at each other. On top of all that, the man who was with her wore an outfit that was head to toe dark colors, like black and navy blue, a hoodie pulled down almost to his eyes, and one of those combo neck-face mask things pulled up past his nose. He was basically dressed like a ninja in 60-degree Fahrenheit weather. It was the pandemic times, but that outfit was overkill. He definitely looked like he was trying to hide his face. I did consider that maybe she was walking alongside us because she was genuinely scared. It was the reason I didn't just leave and pull my husband away with me. She'd call out to us every now and then and say, "You see what I put up with? He won't leave me alone." "Hey," I said after this happened a few times, "come with us to Fellows Avenue. There's a bunch of stores and restaurants there still open. Lots of people, so it'll be safer." She ignored me every time. Just when I decided that this had to be fake, she suddenly asked my husband to tell the masked man to leave her alone, and my husband told him, "Dude, I think you should back off and give her some space. Whatever's going on, you are not helping." And just like that, the creepy ninja guy left. He didn't put up a fight. He didn't tell my husband to mind his own business. Nothing. He just yelled, "I want my stuff back, Jessica," and ran off. I found it strange he gave up so easily. The woman thanked my husband, but then begged us to walk her back home because she was scared he'd be waiting outside of her building. We immediately said no. Between where we were and the avenue she wanted us to walk along were a lot of small playgrounds, churches, schools, and parking lots of medical offices that were closed by then, like radiology centers. Basically, if we walked her home, we'd be passing by a lot of dark, unpopulated places where we could get jumped by Ninja Guy and his friends, and no one would be around to hear us scream. I suggested over and over to walk to Fellows Avenue instead, which would have us walking through well-populated residential neighborhoods, and we could wait in a store together while she called for a police officer to escort her to her friend's place. But she actually said, "Yeah, but it's in the opposite direction of where I live, and that's really inconvenient for me. I'd end up having to walk so much." Who picks convenience over not getting potentially kidnapped and killed? Also, if you knew your creepy psycho ninja boyfriend was going to be waiting for you outside your home to harass you, why would you go home instead of staying with a friend? She also kept telling us her address. "I just need you to walk with me to my building. Number 1234 on Foresters Avenue, apartment 3B. It was like she was trying to reassure us that we really would be escorting her to a real place, and that this definitely was not a plan to rob us or harvest our organs. After several times of us offering to walk her to a restaurant or to a 24-hour drugstore, she finally said she was calling her mother to get her, pulled out her cell phone, and quickly walked away from us. "Hey, we'll wait here with you until your mom picks you up," my husband called out after her. She didn't answer, but started running. We watched her until she turned a corner and disappeared. I know it sounds crazy, but even after that, I still wasn't completely convinced it was fake. I still felt guilty. Maybe she needed our help and we let her down. Maybe she was following us because she felt safer around a couple. Maybe they didn't really box us in. Maybe she just put us between her and her boyfriend so he couldn't grab her. After we arrived home and waited for a few days afterwards, my husband and I really struggled with whether we had just left a poor woman alone to contend with an abusive stalker boyfriend. But the way she and the man she was arguing with acted suggested a scam more than someone trying to get away from an abusive partner. She was more concerned with convenience than safety. She wouldn't take our offer to accompany her down a safer, more populated path to a public place, and she didn't even want us to wait with her while she called her mother. Plus, the guy's outfit was really suspicious. It seemed like he wanted to be sure none of his features were visible. Pretty much all of my friends thought it was a scam too, but I still wondered. I still felt bad. Like a lot of people who post on the Creepy Encounters subreddit, I've been made to feel unsafe by creepy people in the past. So if I see someone in a similar situation, if I can, I want to help them get to safety. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that not everyone who appears to be a victim actually is one. Some people may try to take advantage of your kindness and empathy to steal from you, or worse. Be safe out there. About an hour ago, my manager and I were closing shift at the store in my small town in the north, off the main road and across the rent-controlled apartments. I was waiting at the register as usual and watching people come in around 10 minutes before close, watching who came in so that I could make sure that they all left. There was a guy that came in after a girl that I randomly hyper-fixated on. He walked down the main aisle towards the bathrooms and went out of sight. I don't know why, but I wanted to make sure he left. Customer after customer came and went, the ones I saw come in. But 5 minutes to closing time, he never left. My manager went to the bathroom, and I stayed by the register until she came out and went to the office. I walked around the first few aisles in the front towards the door, and didn't see him. My manager came out and wanted to buy some things, right before we were supposed to close. I told her that I saw a guy come in, but that I didn't see him leave. I felt really uncomfortable and disturbed, and I thought it was just because I'd been listening to the insanely creepy podcast, The Black Tapes. But after she checked the whole store, and then I went around and checked with her, we saw that he'd left a basket. We went into the office after I grabbed my stuff, and we checked the cameras several times. We saw him come in. We watched the cameras again, forwards and backwards, every camera, outside and inside, right by the exit and incoming door. He never left. We decided to leave after about a half an hour and called our general manager. I never saw him leave. The cameras never recorded him leaving. I'm absolutely terrified. I worked as a camp counselor for a few summers and had a great signature ghost story. I don't really remember too many of the details, but the gist was that there was some ghost who would kill you unless you gave him 2 of your teeth and told him 2 other names of people to kill. It was a fine story, but the real kicker came at the end of the night. When all my baby teeth had been replaced with adult teeth, 2 of them never came in and were missing. For a few years, I had a retainer with 2 fake teeth to fill in the gaps. Before sending the kids off to bed, I would pop the retainer out in secret and give them a big old toothy smile. It scared the bejesus out of the little buggers every time. We had a guy who was picking up women in the college town area I lived in and murdering them and dumping them down this road I would bike down to get to my ex-boyfriend's parents' house I'd visit occasionally. I was walking around the college town in broad daylight, and this guy in a beige-looking car pulled over and asked me if I wanted a ride. I kept walking, and I turned down my street to walk back to my house, and he pulled in and tried to cut me off with his car. Immediately, he hops out and tries to grab me, and I started to run. It just so happened someone a little further down that street had gotten pulled over, and I started to scream for the police. He gets in his car and peels off. They caught the guy murdering women sometime later. It was that very same douchebag. I almost lost my shit when I saw it on TV. I was 15 and I was playing in a tennis tournament. It was a typical hot summer. Another player who must have been in his 40s was serving. He tossed the serve up in the air, and then collapsed on the hard court. I rushed over to help and started CPR with his friend. We took turns until the ambulance came, which was about 15 minutes, but it seemed like hours. The EMT took over the CPR and tried to resuscitate him with injections and defibrillators to no avail. They pronounced him dead on the tennis court. I had to continue my match after they moved the body off the courts. My hands kept shaking, so I forfeited the match and sat under a nearby tree, just staring into space. His friend came back to find me near the courts to thank me. He told me about his friend, about his life and his family. Strangely, that made me feel better. I learned from that day how precious life is and how it can all change in an instant. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story of your own to share and you would like me to feature it on the channel, please send it to the email in the description. Or if you prefer, head over to my subreddit, r/stories from Mr. Revenant. It's the stories that keep the channel going. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to my channel members and patrons. Jen, Joy, Handout, Pegasus Genesis, Karen Keating, V. Berry, LJ, Fiona X. Fox, Scott, I Like Booty, Monica Level Ace, Chris and Donna, Holly Spry, Kimber, Jasmine, Sanatix, Heather Haven, Kitty Cat Luna 2, ADHD Aurora, Janice, Cinderella Baby, Borderline Betty, Lady Dracard, Erica Nicole, Snowball Rathina, Melanie, The Honeybee 987, Pretty Girl 215, Ryan, Brooke, Wendy, Crafty Kel, Tina, Dina, Vampy Debs, Patricia, Amber, Krista, Brenda, Absinthe Alice, Christy, Kay, Spider's Web, Ooh La La Andrea, Sue, Monique, Sean Gorman, Emma Lisa, Sigma Cube X, Greg, Chelsea, Amanda Jane, Sam, Zep Tepe, Sarah C., Austin, Tegan, Lil Smart, Jenny, Gabrielle, Fire05, Sarah P., James Gargano, Gemma Allen, Monica Level Ace, and Alex. I hope you're all doing well, guys. I'll see you all on the next one.